Everyone, I am back from Germany and I'm going to apologise in advance because I'm ill. Naturally, you go to a show and you come back with some kind of allergy. So if I sound disgusting, I genuinely apologise. But this video, I get a lot of people talking about like their plans when they start painting miniatures. It doesn't end that way, or things don't work out the way they want. So I thought it'd be really good to do like a retrospective on this model, on the initial plan of what I was going to do with it, how those plans drastically changed, how I managed the challenges that came up as I went, and then just end with how Golden Demon went and my thoughts. So as always, I'm hoping it's helpful. Cheers for watching. Let me know what you think. Here we go. I think first of all, we really need to talk about inspiration. This is Lord Mazdumundi from Ben Comics, and basically Ben won gold back in 2009. I think he won the Slayer Sword with this as well. This was back when I was much younger and I wasn't really heavy into painting, and I remember seeing this in White Dwarf and just falling in absolute love with it. And I also was a big Warhammer Fantasy fan at the time, and it always infuriated me that we had this amazing character and there was no model. There was just this one page of rules and a little bit of narrative text to say who he was, and I absolutely loved it. And then Ben did this, and I've just loved it ever since. To this day, it's one of my all-time favorite, if not my favorite, Golden Demon pieces. I think it's amazing. Compositionally, it's incredible. The paintwork is stunning for the time, and I think that's a relevant. I think that's a fair comment. The paintwork is amazing for the time. The work is amazing for the time. We've obviously progressed quite a bit, but the reality is I always knew that I wanted to do a rendition of this at some point. I just never thought I was capable of it. And as soon as I decided, right, I'm going to give this a go with the new Slan, when GW released the new Slan Star Master, I knew full well that I wanted to give this a go. Now, although this is my biggest inspiration, there's also an element of, at this point in time, this model is very dated, right? There are a few things on it which I knew that I wanted to avoid at all costs. I don't like the Haldar design in general, and there's nothing wrong with the design for the Haldar that the Slan sits on, because it's actually quite faithful to the original artwork. But there were just things that I wanted to update. But regardless, this is my biggest inspiration. I think I managed to. It was a bit of a crazy weekend actually, because not only was my first Golden Demon win Lord Mazdumundi, not only was this particular model by Ben Comics my first true introduction to display painting, and not only is it a really, really important piece for me historically, like, because I've just loved it since I was a kid. I actually got to meet Ben Comics this weekend and talk about it as well. So it all kind of came together and it was pretty crazy, not to mention the fact that I won my first demon with it, obviously. So this was a really, really big deal, and I think it's really important to talk about the foundation of where the idea comes from. And I love old world, I love old fantasy, and I'm probably going to be doing a few more old custom characters because I just love the setting. So my GD pieces are probably going to have a few of those, but this is the big one, and this is where it came from. And my original idea, I wanted to stay quite faithful to the colors, and this is where things get quite interesting, because my original idea was I want to do a rendition of Ben Comics Mazdumundi, but I want to update a few key areas, specifically the throne. And I always wanted to give the Stegodon the mask. In the artwork and the lore, he has a mask. So that was really key for me. But other than that, I was going to do basically a carbon copy of this piece. And obviously that did not happen. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first being Warhammer Total War had a Lord Mazdumundi in the computer game. So for anyone who doesn't know, Total War Warhammer is a PC game, and it's awesome. And Lord Mazdumundi is a very big character in that. So that gave me a lot of inspiration and a lot of artwork to base how I wanted to paint this. And the reality is the Lord Mazdumundi from Total War Warhammer is very different to the original renditions that we have. He's got a lot more colour in him. The throne design is very different, which I was happy about. There's also some weird things, like they've changed the style of the slan and that sort of stuff, which I was willing to completely ignore. But these concept drawings and in-game footage really gave me a great idea on what I should do. I also, to be honest with you, I should probably point out I think it's fair to say I had a lot of pressure from a friend of mine, Aaron, AC Miniatures, about introducing more colour into my work, because I tend to paint with a very muted palette. And I think he was right to push me. The reality is I'm still not as bright as he would like, but ultimately it's my work, not his. But I think this is really important to talk about the positive influence of the people you surround yourself with, because I do think this would have done a lot worse and would have been a lot less interesting if I hadn't have tried to push that color. And obviously this is on video, so he might see it, but I'm never going to admit that to him. But the reality is, I think it's important we talk about this idea of you should surround yourself with the right people, and the people who should be pushing you in a positive way and genuinely want you to succeed. And this is a really good example of it as well. My original idea and concept, which I'm going to show you shortly, it was much more muted, it was much more brown, and the reality is Aaron was pushing me the whole time, going, no, you need to go more saturated, you need to push more orange into this, it needs more red, it needs more life. And at the time, the truth is, I really was fighting against that, kicking and screaming, but he just didn't stop pushing me, and that was really helpful as well. So I had this new artwork from Total War Warhammer, which gave me a brown option of Mazdumundi, which was much more satisfying to me, or there was more cartoony artwork, which you can see on screen, which was much more vibrant and orange, and that's more what Aaron was pushing me towards. And then on this note of this circle of people who you should try to search out and find, to be honest with you, I never recorded any of the build or conversion process for this model, and it's very simply because I never believed that I could do it. I will record all of the sculpting process and everything for future projects, but the reality is I never believed that I could pull this off. I never believed that I could do the throne. There was steps in this piece which I always thought I was completely incapable of, and they were going to be points where I'd painted like for 50 hours or 100 hours or whatever it is, and then just go, right, I'm done. I've got to stop. I can't do it. And there were several of those. First of all, when I started, there was no way I was going to be able to repose those legs and sculpt the legs. I had no idea how to do it. And to be fair, I had a lot of help from Amphiaris and Requiem, and they kind of guided me and gave me some help and influence. And again, like, this is the importance of having the right people around you. So first of all, the legs, like, I didn't believe that I could do them. I thought that was going to be the end of the project straight away, and it worked. And I thought, right, okay, this is now going to get easier. No, I then needed to completely re-sculpt the neck. This was another panic moment. This is now, like, the legs in the grand scheme of things were really small. Like, they weren't massive chunks of green stuff. They're a little bit more forgiving. Resculpting and repositioning entire head and neck, there's a whole different animal. Could I do it? Probably not. The reality is I left it for a couple of weeks, came back, gave it a go, and it worked. And these moments were like genuine moments of shock. Like, I can't believe this is actually happening. So at that point I thought, right, I'm gonna have to move on to the throne. So I picked up a couple of the Slan Star Masters, and because I knew that I was going to ruin one of them, and in the end I went through 3 of these models. I ruined 2 Games Workshop Slan Star Masters in the process of creating this throne. And basically what I had to do was I had to strip off all of the details, and then I had to fill it all with milliput. Now, this was a huge amount of work. I'm not going to lie, it's a massive amount of work, and to be honest, I was really scared. This was a really scary point. I was really scared that I was going to fill all of this stuff with milliput, sand it all down, and I wasn't going to be able to do a good enough job of it. And then by the time I painted it, all of that stuff was going to show through. So I had this point, and there was a few points with this where I was like, right, the throne is now done and ready to go, but I've still got to finish the entire rest of the conversion. I've still got to paint a huge amount of this model, and potentially when I come to paint the throne, the build quality is not going to be good enough and it's going to hold me back. And the reason why I'm talking to you about this sort of stuff is because there are so many points where I wanted to quit. Because there were so many points where I was like, I've never done this before, I'm not going to be able to do it. What happens if 50 hours down the line, this all goes wrong? And again, Aaron and Liam and that sort of, and the guys, they were pushing me all the time. They were telling me like, this is your shot. This is literally the best thing that you've done. This is going to make a splash. Like you need to work through it and you need to finish it. And the truth is I wouldn't have finished it if they were not pushing me. And I think it's so important because so many people give up on models. And they give up on models just because they think, oh, the paintwork isn't right, or I can't quite get this blend, or I can't quite get this illusion. But you can if you just keep working through it. Just take some time and reflect. There's nothing wrong with taking a break for a couple of weeks on a piece. It can really, really be helpful. So again, once I'd done the throne, I was like, right, brilliant. Now I need to work the mask out. No idea how to do this. And I want to point out, you can see 3 of the horns have got milliput and I painted them gold. Like they were gold tipped. That was never a choice. That was because I broke 3 of the horns. So because I broke those horns, I had to basically try to do something to recover the issue. And in hindsight, I really should have left those horns on while I was painting, but I didn't. And while I was painting this as well, I broke all of the horns. I broke the horns 5 times. So in total over the whole build, there was 8 breakages on those horns that I had to fix throughout. And again, I just had to keep pushing through. I got to this point of elation where I was so happy. I had this Stegodon, I had it on the base, like on that brown rock that you can see, and it was awesome. Like I was so shocked. I was saying to the guys, like, I've done it. Like it's just worked. I can't believe it's happened. And then I put the slan on the actual throne itself, and it looked awful. And I wish I took a picture of this actually, but the slan was sitting upright, and the problem is the throne was now tilted to one side. It was no longer sitting straight upright, so the slan looked like he was falling over. And I had this ridiculous moment where I thought, right, I'm gonna have to repose the slan, but it's all one big chunk. And it made me realize that I had to re-sculpt the entire stomach for the slan, and I had to re-sculpt an entire leg. And again, I think I left it for about 2 months before I touched this model again, because I just couldn't convince myself that I was capable of doing it. And I managed to pull it off. And to this day, it still baffles me how I did it, but you can't tell that it's re-sculpted at the end. But there was all of these points before I even got to paint where I wanted to quit and give up, and there was just no need. And I'd like to point as well, the sculpt and conversion on this is not perfect. It's far from perfect. It's so far from perfect. It's unreal, but you don't notice any of it because the overall result is good. So this is really important. If you guys are going to do conversions and things like that, you don't need perfection, you need believability. This was my biggest learning point from this piece. You just need believability in your conversion, not perfection. Big thing that I think is really worth talking about is the original plan compared to what ended up, and the big decisions that I made or that I changed, which were a huge improvement, and they happened throughout the process. So the first thing that changed, that I realized that I had to change, which really scared me, honestly, was the throne. The original intention was the throne was going to be a big chunk of stone with carved patterning. So it was going to look like it was going to have these like lizardman symbols all over it, and they were going to be carved in. The problem is I found very early that it looked too dull. It was too uninteresting. And although it helped push the frog as the focal point, because the color made the lack of color made the slan pop more, the reality is the dominant areas of the piece, the majority of the piece was dull and boring. And this was a terrifying moment for me, because it made me realize that, first of all, This is like 30% of the model. My plan was completely out the window. And I had a bit of a... I actually had about a bit of a series of panics here. Like, this all happened in like the space of a couple of days. And I got to a real point where I was like, maybe I just can't do this. Maybe I just need to just leave this and move on to something else. And I did start painting something else for Golden Demon as well, because I'd hit this point where I was like, everything is going wrong. So the original intention with the throne had to be shifted. I always knew that I was going to have some overgrowth on it. That was always the intention, but it was going to be aged rock with like carved symbols in it. And it just looked really uninteresting and really dull. Like, it made the whole piece look dull. And then I had this knock-on effect where I was like, right, well, the Stegodon's going to be brown as well, because the Stegodon was being based off... There were a few key color choices which I was basing off the actual Warhammer, Total War Warhammer artwork. So the Stegodon was going to be brown because that's what it is in the game, and it looks good. Mazdumundi was going to be brown because that was the particular color that I chose, because there was two pieces of artwork. There's an orange Maz, and then there's a red-brown, like maroon Maz, and I chose the red-brown because that's how I like to paint. I like to paint with muted colors normally. So I had this steamroll where I went, right, the throne is not going to work because it's just boring. Too much of the model is boring. It's very grey, it's very dull, it's very rubbish. And then like a few hours later, I'm going over it, I'm trying to work out how to fix it. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to put more color into it. That's the ridiculous bit. I'm not the sort of person who likes to throw color over everything. And I've got, once again, I've got Aaron and Liam in my ear. They're telling me, like, you've got to push this. You've got to push more color into it. You've got to get some life into it somewhere. And I just didn't want to acknowledge that feedback. And then it had this knock-on effect where I was like, well, the Stegodon is just brown. It's rubbish. The dinosaur is just, it literally is the color of poo. And this is also not helping the actual challenge that's coming up with this, because now instead of 30% of this being dull and boring, now 70% of this model, or 60% of this model, is now dull and boring. It's browns and greys. And then to top it all off, I'm thinking, well, the frog is brown as well. So like 80% of this model has no life, no interest to it. And I realized that actually I've got a massive compositional problem. The only focal point on this model, as you can see on the left right now, really is the mask of the Stegodon, which I knew that I was going to be doing gold, and the focal point was going to be the staff, which was just awful. So I had to go back to the drawing board completely. I took the advice from the guys. I went back to the artwork and I had a think. I realized that actually the frog just needed more saturation. There was nothing wrong with going with these brownie oranges or brownie reds, because that was my spot color. If you look at all my focal points, they've all got yellow and orange in it. So the answer was, as much as I hate to admit it, the answer was to really brighten and bump up the saturation on the frog. And that will mean that your focal point now, as you can see, is the Stegodon's mask, the frog and the throne, and that's what was important. I also realized that there was nothing really wrong with having the Stegodon as brown. The biggest problem is it wasn't separating from the base enough. There wasn't, like, it wasn't bright enough for a start. It needed a little bit more life. But the big thing is it really blended in with the base, because the base was never going to be very bright. So I just decided to half and half the Stegodon and see what happens. I knew I didn't, this is really important, I knew I didn't want a lot of color in the actual dinosaur itself, because if I push too much color in the dinosaur, it's just going to actually detract from the amount of color that I put in the throne, the frog, and the mask. So the Stegodon was never a question of let's change the colors or let's make it more saturated or vibrant or anything. It was just I needed something to separate it from the base. And this all happened in like the space of that. All of these issues kind of came up in the space of maybe 2 or 3 days. And this was once again one of those points where I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can fix it. I don't know if I can manage it. And this is all irrational because I knew I could. 1, because I have the experience to do it. 2, because I have people around me who can help me out with it. But this was another point where I put this model down for a month and a half. And bearing in mind, I'm painting this, Golden Demon is coming up. I wanted to get it finished in time for Germany. But yeah, I put it down for a month and a half because I really had to take some time to reflect. So this was a really, really big point. And I genuinely didn't know if I could finish it at this point. But it was huge. Those were the 3 massive steps, massive challenges, where I had to completely pivot from my initial plan. And it was really big as well, because I'd already started painting these things as well. So I was repainting the throne. I had to repaint probably 60% of the frog. I had to repaint the entire half of the stegodon, all of the legs, all of the pink bits. And that was like, I'd wasted 50, 60, 70 hours of work, but it had to be done. So I think this is really important when people talk about like, the models that I'm painting, they just don't look like what I planned at the beginning, like, because I've got to make these things work. And the reality is everyone does that. It's a very rare person that just has a idea in their head and then they just put it onto the model and go, that's it, it's done, it's perfect. Like, it's a very rare person who doesn't have to make some kind of changes. And also, I was going to put a lot more green in the original one. Like, there was going to be more green in the gold. There was going to be more green. Like, the scales were going to be green as well. And it was just a little bit too much. It was a little bit overpowering. So I had to knock that back a little bit. But hopefully this is... Honestly, hopefully this is helpful. Because the big thing here is I went from something which honestly was really weak compositionally. Because remember, with a composition, ideally... we want 3 focal points. We want 1 main focal point, and then we want 2 secondary focal points. That's ideally what we're aiming for. In this case, I have 2. I have my main focal point, which is the frog, and then the second focal point is the mask of the dinosaur. And that's what I've got. And it's fine. I would have liked a third, but there just wasn't an interesting enough feature. You could argue the back leg is a bit of a focal point, but I would say it's not strong enough. So composition is huge, and I think people get caught up a lot on the quality of the paintwork, whereas in actually what we should really be focusing on above everything is what the models look like from like arm's length, from 2 or 3 feet away, and then you worry about the paintwork from there. So this was a real battle for me. I really, really struggled with this. The whole piece was just, every single step was a challenge. Because also, bearing in mind, the mask, the pattern on the mask was freehand. The throne is covered in freehand. I didn't know if I could do that. That was the other thing. Like, there was entire sections of this model which I was leaving to the end because I was too afraid to paint them. The throne was the last thing that I painted, other than like the horns and that sort of stuff, like the small stuff, because I was actually too afraid to paint it and find out if I could do it. And that was 3 weeks before Golden Demon. I think it's also fun to talk about the disasters that happened on this project. So originally on the throne, I had sculpted... Games Workshop have got like this sculpted moldy stuff on the throne of the Slan Starmaster. And I was like, oh, I'll follow along with that. And I sculpted additional ones on. And at the end of it, it turned out to be absolutely rubbish. They looked terrible. But the throne was painted. So it was right at the end. So the moss tufts that went, the overgrowth that went over the throne, although I intended to have something like those honestly were there to literally hide how rubbish that part of the sculpt was. I did it to cover up the disaster, and it was a disaster. So that was a big challenge that I had. Like I said, I broke the horns 8 times in the end. So it was 3 days before Golden Demon. I got to a point where I stopped fixing them on the head. It was 3 days before Golden Demon, and I've got milliput and green stuff. I'm filling it. I'm creating the shape for the horns. The whole thing is painted, so I've got the whole thing wrapped in cling film, and then I'm sanding down these horns, trying to get them to the right shape, trying to get them to blend in with the rest of the broken horn. And then it's like 2 days, I think it was the night before I flew out for Golden Demon, to be fair, and I'm literally painting these golden horns going, this is the best that I can do in the time frame. So I had a terrible, like awful parts of the sculpt. Again, like I was in too much of a panic to take pictures, and I apologize. But I had an awful part of the throne where I sculpted these moss things, these overgrowth, and they looked rubbish, and it was either slice them off and fix the throne, and repaint those sections, or cover them in AK moss tufts. I had broken horns all the way along, and I had to fix them like 2 or 3 days beforehand. I broke the throne, the totem piece, whatever it is, at the top of the throne, the golden piece. I broke that off the night before Golden Demon, packing it into the case. So like there was loads of there was loads of stuff that just went absolutely terribly. And I'll put a picture of this up as well. To top it all off, I had genuinely like 3 millimeters of space between the top of Mazdumundi and the top of my case to carry it to Germany, because it was so close. It was such a tight fit. And this is like, this is before. So when I got, so obviously we've got to get it on the aeroplane and get it across. That's a panic in itself, because you're like, people are bumping into you. You're being like wildly protective over it. It's really hard to fix something when you're over there. And then what I had actually realized, where I had to glue a couple of these moss tufts onto the throne, I used super glue. And at the time I thought, right, that's fine. That's done. I'm in a rush. Like, let's get it finished. On the Friday of Golden Demon, the model is in the cabinet, and I'm looking at it, and I can see frosted super glue. And actually, when I zoom in, you can see it on the picture, right? You can see frosted super glue coming through the moss tufts. It was shocking, and I was panicking. I was like, well, that's me out. Like, there's no way they're going to reward something like that. I was not in a rational frame of mind on the Friday. And then I went back to the hotel, and I literally couldn't sleep. I got about 3 hours of sleep, because I was just like, I can't believe you've blown it. It's such a stupid mistake to make. You know better than this. And then it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. I realized, why don't I just ask to take the model back out and fix it? So I had this point where Saturday morning came up. I knew the deadline to have all entries in was 12 o'clock. I rushed over to Golden Demon, like, as soon as they opened, asked for my model out, and this is where the guys over at Artis Opus, like, I'm never going to say a bad word about Artis Opus again. Like, I rushed over to Artis Opus, the booth, and I'm holding my Mazdumundi model, and Byron just looks at me, laughs, and just says, sit down and do what you've got to do. So it's Saturday morning, it's 2 hours before the deadline to have everything in, and I'm still fixing my model. I'm painting my model. I'm painting over these bits of frosted super glue on the throne. And then I have to take it back. So it's a proper emotional roller coaster when it comes to doing this sort of stuff. And I think that's really important to talk about. And I think it's really important to talk about everyone that helps along the way. Like, it's really, the community is really amazing. Like, if Byron hadn't have been such a good guy, he basically gave up his entire Artis Opus booth for the Golden Demon painters over the weekend to fix breakages, to just hang out and chat, and like, genuinely it was amazing. But the disasters didn't stop, is my point, right? And there's points where you see people handling your models behind the cabinets. Like, one of Maz got picked up at one point, and it was about an inch off of the shelf, so it wasn't anything bad, but it slipped out of the guy's hand, and I was like, right, is that it? Like, this panic moment where I'm thinking, right, Maz is about to get smashed. So disasters and the stresses that come with it, even without the competition, for something like this, when you're going for a really high quality piece, it happens to everyone. Like, that's why I'm going over this, and I apologize if I'm rambling, but so many people come to me when I'm doing the tuition, and they're talking about how their pieces are not going the way that they planned it, or how these disasters are happening and things are getting broke, or like they don't like what's the result that they're getting. And the reality is we all have that. It's really, really important. As for things I would do different, it's a bit crazy to say this, but I wouldn't really do anything different. The orbs that I did, like on the mask, the back of the throne, that sort of stuff, I didn't paint like gems. I wanted them like jade orbs. And the truth is, I wish I'd painted them like gems, because it would have been a little bit more of a material difference for the judges to look at. And like, actually, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I would have made the frog even more vibrant, as crazy as that is. I think in hindsight, I would have pushed that. But my only real regret, let's say, is I wish I had more time. And I think we always say that when it comes to Golden Demon pieces. I wish I had more time to refine the horns, to spend more times on the scales, to spend more time on like the ropes and the little details to render the skulls. Overall, I'm really, really happy with this, but I think it's just really fun to talk about the stresses that come with a piece like this. And I think it's worth, like, I don't think it's healthy to do nothing but display and competition. Like, I don't think it's healthy to do nothing but competition pieces. They're so stressful. They're so tense because you're always aiming for, like, to try and make everything the best. And that is not healthy. And to be honest with you, this piece for me was always a labor of love. I love this character. I told you at the beginning about Ben Comets, like how much Ben Comets' piece was influential on me. The truth is, I never truly believed that I would win a demon with this because I tested so much. I tried so many things. It was always, this is a real labor of love. So, and I think that's just the way that I'm going to work going forward, because the minute we start thinking about, right, this is a competition piece, this has to be my best work, it can become wildly toxic. It can really, really mess with your head. It's not helpful. And the truth is, you've got no idea what the judges are going to think on the day, right? There's no rhyme or rhythm to it. Like, I'm not going to get into the judging at Golden Demon, but there were some elements of it that no one could grasp why they had made these choices. And that's all I'm going to say on it, to be honest with you. I would like to talk about what beat me, for want of a better phrase. Christian's Knight. This was stunning in person. And what's really frustrates me with this is I never saw this all weekend because it was at the bottom of the cabinet. The top of the cabinets, the lights were terrible. The bottom of the cabinets, the lights were terrible and you couldn't tell anything. So I didn't see this. That's not fair. I didn't notice this as a nice piece until it was on the commended shelf. And the truth is, it was silver all along, right? And I'm not saying that to be modest or anything like that. The reality is it was an exceptionally painted piece. I would say it's about on par with my own. That may come across as arrogant. I apologize, but I would say it's about on par with my own. The difference is there are elements of it which are better, in my opinion, but most importantly, this is consistently great across the whole piece. Whereas with Maz, there are elements like the horns and that sort of stuff where I just ran out of time because it's so big. So I don't have any regrets with this. When I saw it on the commended cabinet, I was like, I'm going to say it. The truth is, I thought I was going to get bronze. There was a part of me that was telling me that I was telling myself that I was going to get nothing because it's easier to manage my emotions like that. But my gut was telling me that I deserved a bronze. This was going to be silver. And the reality is, Angelo DiCello, we knew this was gold the minute it turned up. I saw this at the Artist Opus stand. He was unpacking his models. I walked past this with Aaron and Liam from 3 feet away, laughed and said that was gold before I even looked at it up close. This was clear gold all weekend. It was an amazing piece. Angelo is an absolute legend and really, really happy for him. So I'm obviously happy with the result at Golden Demon. There are 1,000 things that I wish had gone easier, that maybe I've done a few things differently or better is probably the best way of putting it. But the reality is I'm really happy with the result. I'm hoping this video has been useful because we don't talk about the stresses and the frustrations. Like most of the time, everything's just here's another tutorial. So I'm hoping this video has been helpful. Let me know what you think, guys. I have obviously recorded loads of the process for Maz. We're going to be getting those videos over the next few weeks. But thank you as always. I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think. And cheers.